Have you seen The Last Starfighter?
Greetings, Starfighter. You have been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zur and the Kodan Armada.
Yeah.
Get ready. Prepare for blast.
What happens when a trailer park handyman who only wishes to leave home plays video games in his downtime? Well, that leads to him being abducted and sold by aliens into a galactic military to fight in a war he didn't even know about. This movie, I was terrified to watch it. This movie, the original Star Wars, and Aladdin were my childhood movies. Now, Star Wars VHS and Aladdin have held up over time and are terrific movies, but still I was paranoid that this movie was going to be an absolute dud, that, eventually one of my favorite childhood movies would flop. But I was proven wrong. Not only did this movie live up to my childhood memories, it also had things that I didn't remember. Like, I completely forgot about the comedy in this movie. It was filled with humor. And if you read into some of the history, most of the humorous shots of the beta unit were actually filmed after the actual filming of what the movie was supposed to be about was done. They showed it in front of a test audience who really liked the beta unit, so they went back in and they added a bunch of scenes. So more of the Starfighter base was cut in order to fit more beta unit humor. They just felt like they needed to insert more humor to help differentiate it from Star Wars, which was a very wise choice. But this movie does have one thing that doesn't hold up over the course of time, which, if you've seen this movie, then you already know it's the CGI. It was very impressive and daring for its time. It was the second movie after Tron, and as a kid, the CGI was awesome. But now in 2025, it's still better than George Lucas's Star Wars insertions. But I still wouldn't mind if a fan or a group of CGI pros released their own version. The actual starfighting in the movie is fine. A few moments look even great. But the real standout, negatively speaking, with the CGI is the Starfighter base post-destruction. And at that time, you just couldn't do a lot. So, it feels bland, but I don't hold that against them. But I still love this movie. And we're about to start talking about the making of the movie, i.e., the idea, where it came from, the director, producers, writers, etc. Before making our way over to the CGI and then cast. Before finally talking about the plot in my review. If you wish to jump to that now, the plot and all that, here's a timestamp to direct you to that. But if you want to hear a little backstory of the movie, let's jump into it. The movie was written by Jonathan R. Batal. Now, you may be asking yourself, who is John R. Batal? And you wouldn't be the only one, mainly because, John didn't write barely anything after this movie. He wrote and directed, which may have killed his career as a writer, 2 more movies and the story to a TV show. Those 2 movies I have never heard of. One is My Science Project, which stars John Stockwell as a young Kevin Bacon from The Tremors, Fisher Stevens before he made the mistake of playing a Koopa, and Dennis Hopper, Crazy Pull. And the other one is Theodore Rex, a Whoopi Goldberg movie. The TV show, by the way, was Freddy's Nightmares. He directed 2 episodes and wrote the story into 1. Now, I have heard of Freddy's Nightmares, but I have never seen it. But after his career as a director and writer took a hit after Theodore Rex, John Batal, he didn't leave Hollywood and has in fact worked on, maybe not personally, but numerous movie and TV show productions for the past 20 years or so with the company he founded called Luma Pictures. Now, I don't know if he's still with the company as of 2016. Based on a Google search, he filed a lawsuit against Luma. But at the same time, in 2025, he has the owner of Luma listed on his LinkedIn page. So he might have left, filed a lawsuit, and eventually settled out of court before joining back with them. I don't know. Either way, a brief history of the company. It debuted in 2002 with the work on Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. And since then, it has completed visual effects on over 150 films and episodes, including Pirates of the Caribbean at World's Edge, the Underworld franchise, Prisoners, Mary Poppins Returns, Candyman, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, including the Spider-Man franchise, the Tomorrow War, and I Am Groot, for which it was the lead VFX provider for the first season. So, impressive resume for a guy that created Theodore Rex. But back to what I was talking about, how did Batal come up with the idea of The Last Starfighter? Well, Batal says he originally came up with the idea while reading Once and Future King by R.H. White, when he went into an arcade and saw a kid playing one of the games, and a thought entered his head about what it would be like if someone was chosen, like Sword in the Stone, and that sent ripples through space. It's an interesting idea, but this wasn't entirely like that. Mainly that Alex Rowland's Merlin actually abducted him, sold him into a galactic military, so not exactly Sword in the Stone. But at the same time, as a sort of segue into the director, you have to admit, because of the beta unit humor insert, that Nick Castle, the director, took more liberties with the movie than what I think was in the script, which allowed this movie to unshackle itself from the Star Wars clone, while at the same time not pursuing that Sword in the Stone angle either. Nick Castle, for some of you cinephiles, will be a very recognizable name. It is in fact the same Nick Castle who portrayed the original Michael Myers in Halloween 1 and 2, and did in fact come back to portray him again in the Halloween revival remake Erasure. He also co-wrote Escape from New York with John Carpenter, who he's close friends with, and directed movies like The Boy Who Could Fly, Dennis the Menace, and Major Payne. But I feel like a lot of what makes this movie great is Nick Castle. Like I mentioned earlier, he had Lance Guest come back and play Beta Alex Rogan again after screen testers really enjoyed the Beta unit scenes. And a little tidbit, Lance Guest had to wear a wig because he already cut his hair for another role, or he had a simple haircut. But Nick Castle also had Robert Preston Centauri in mind, and even had his role reshaped in order to be more similar to his character in the 1962 movie The Music Man.
Now, Mars, I need some ideas if I'm going to get your town out of the serious trouble it's in.
River City ain't in any trouble.
Well, then I have to create some.
He also had the movie moved to a trailer park after disagreeing with the suburbs because he thought it would be too similar to E.T. and Encounter with the Third Kind. And one more trivia note about Nick Castle is he helped choose a lot of the cast, and one such cast member was Lance Guest, aka Alex Rogan. During the editing process for Halloween 2, Carpenter and Castle were talking. They were watching Halloween 2 and editing it. And they were probably talking about, a little bit like The Last Starfighter and which part worked best where. And Castle saw Guest in Halloween 2 and asked Carpenter about him. And that's how Guest got chosen to be Alex Rogan. Now let's talk about the man that helped create much of the environment and the look of The Last Starfighter, Ron Cobb. Ron Cobb is not a set designer or really any physical shaper, but more conceptual. He helped design the look of the gun stars and the star car for the movie. He helped doodle up the ideas of the aliens and the costumes and many of the other looks. But back to the star car, he originally designed what would become the star car and had them create the car with CGI and even in real life. Now, the reason I mention that is because of the impact he had on cinema after this movie. The same idea and look for the star car was also inspired the look of another flying car, the time-traveling car from Back to the Future. The DeLorean look in Back to the Future was lifted from The Last Starfighter, probably because Cobb was the conceptual designer on it as well. But they loved the look of the DeLorean so much that if you look closely in Back to the Future 2, you'll see the same star car parked right here. But Cobb's work, which can be seen in multiple movies from Aliens, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars A New Hope, Total Recall, and District 9, is all a bunch of phenomenal work. And when you see some of these drawings, it just makes you awe and be inspired to come up with your own stories. But when it comes to this movie, those ideas were brought to life by another talented group of people, Digital Productions. But before I go there, a special mention must be given to Gene Winfield, the actual creator of the star car. Gene was the man for a while in Hollywood that you went to in order to make iconic cars. Such projects by Gene were the Sunbeam Tiger and Get Smart, the reactor cars in Bewitched, Batman, Star Trek, and Mission Impossible. He also created the shuttlecraft Galileo for the original Star Trek and worked on numerous film projects. He helped create the RoboCop 6000 Sucks, over 25 different vehicles for Blade Runner, including the police spinner, and 6 bubble top movie cars for Sleeper. Now we're moving on to the CGI. The CGI was done by Digital Productions on a Cray X-MP supercomputer. Not that I know anything about it, other than the fact that it kind of looks like a weird art project for benches. Now, if you go listen to the documentary about the making of The Last Starfighter, which is a great watch for those who wish to see early CGI work, this movie, though, was an insurmountable task at the time. The CGI experts who were working for digital production said that the CGI could take up to 17 months to complete, and they had 5. So there were a lot of sleepless nights, and many people actually stayed in the office to complete the project, celebrating and slaving over 250,000 polygons with their 3 by 5,036-bit pixels. Now, I don't personally know if that's a lot or a little. I don't know if I'm supposed to be awestruck or not. I mean, I'm going to be a little awestruck, but I do know that Call of Duty's weapons on Ultra setting have 25,000 polygons, and that's asking these people to do a tenth of the same work that a modern video game has in 1984. Even if it was a supercomputer, it was a phenomenal task. And here's another thing to think about. Tron had about 15 minutes of CGI, and it was the first CGI movie. The Last Starfighter had nearly double that 2 years later at 27 minutes of CGI. And you could say that Tron started the CGI trend, but The Last Starfighter was the movie that made many filmmakers eager to give it a chance. And another film came along 7 years later and did prove that CGI could be wildly profitable, and that was Terminator 2. But I also must mention that this movie had several practical effects that were done beautifully, like the beta unit in the bed or when he's working on his head, which were done by practical effects artist Lance Anderson, so he definitely deserves a shout out as much as the CGI. So before I give a general overview of who has been in this movie, some of their achievements before and after this film, I just want to say that this movie didn't really make any careers. It was the ending of one actor, a stopgap for another, brief cinema moment for one, and the start of what could have been a successful career and a no-starter for many. So let's be quick so we can get to the plot and review. Barbara Boston, who played the mother, Jane Rogan, but for her, this was kind of like her last real role in movies. She did a couple of TV movies and theatrical movies here and there, but most of her career was in TV with roles such as Faye Ferrillo in Hill Street Blues, Captain C.Z. Stern in Hooperman, and Miriam Grossi in Murder 1. Chris Herbert, or Lewis, did this movie, and like a few others, didn't really go anywhere. He mainly did commercials and this movie, Fuzz Bucket. He did play RFK Jr. in Robert Kennedy and His Times in 1985, but that was it. He teaches now, so good for him for finding a second avenue. Norman Snow, who plays Zur, did a few more movies, but mainly got his bread and butter on TV with roles like Man from Atlantis, Quantum Leap, Law and Order, Beverly Hills 90210, and the highlight of his television career was in Next Generation for the 6th season finale, Rightful Heir. Now on to our 4 main central characters, Grig, Maggie, Centauri, and Alex. Dan O'Herlihy, who plays Grig, he's the one who really, this role was a stopgap in between his more recognizable characters. 3 years later, he would play a character that I know much better because he isn't wearing a pound of makeup and prosthetics, and that is the old man in RoboCop 1 and 2. But you may also recognize him from movies such as Waterloo, Big Cube, 100 Rifles, MacArthur, The Rat Pack, and Season 3, Episode 10 of the Batman animated series as Grant Walker. Catherine Mary Stewart, or Maggie, honestly left this movie huge. This was her first role where she was front and center, and she made an impact. After this, she would go on to star in many, many movies such as Night of the Comet, Mischief, Scenes from the Gold Mine, Dudes, Night Flyers. Yes, the George R.R. Martin novella. He also wrote the movie screenplays, World Gone Wild, and Weekend at Bernie's. But she did the unthinkable in Hollywood, which ultimately led to the downfall of her career. She stopped acting in order to raise her kids. And after that, she never regained her fame. Now, Robert Preston, Centauri, this would be one of the last roles of his career. He would go on to do 2 TV movies, one of them for HBO, but this was his last cinema outing. Robert Preston, though, was a golden age actor who is generally overlooked during a time of Henry Fonda, John Wayne, Rock Hudson, Mickey Rooney, etc., etc. But he had a very successful career that lasted 3 decades with movies such as My Outlaw Brother, The Last Frontier, and The Music Man. But sometime in the 60s, he just left cinema for 10 years. And after that, his career never looked the same. He returned, but didn't have nearly the same volume of movies as he once did, as Hollywood had moved past the Golden Age era and was now going into the height of Silver Age in the early 70s. He would do a few more roles, like The Last Starfighter, before finally passing away from lung cancer. Lance Guest, our star, who had a worse career than Mark Hamill, the Last Starfighter was the watermark of his career. After it, he would star in like Jaws: The Revenge, Wizards of Loneliness, Mach 2, Late Phases in 2014. After that, he's kind of in his Will Wheaton phase where he does cameos or documentary series. But he did have a brief moment of fame on and off Broadway in 2010 to 2011 for the play $1 Million Quartet, where he plays Johnny Cash. And before we jump into the plot, special mention must also be given to Craig Safran for his wonderful soundtrack and his many other soundtracks over the years in movies that I haven't seen. But the ones that I have seen, like Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Fade to Black, Stand and Deliver, and Major Payne. So, thank you, sir. Alright, thank you for tuning in for those who jumped here, and thank you to those who have listened to me prattle on before finally making it here. But like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, to give a general glazing over of the story, Alex Rogan is a simple 18-year-old who only wishes to move away from his hometown to where everyone else lives. But when it isn't the trailer park neighbors and his friends asking for his help, it's the bank denying his loan for school. Alex feels hopeless and lost, with his only means of venting being an arcade game called Starfighter. So Alex, one night while playing Starfighter, trying to ignore his girlfriend's pleas, sets a high score record while entertaining a crowd of people who, for some odd reason, are really invested in Alex in this game. Soon after everyone has gone to bed, a futuristic car and a mysterious stranger beckons Alex to get into his car.
Also in Sacramento, the search for a missing person.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a joke. But, don't get in strangers' cars. But after climbing into the stranger's car, Centauri introduces himself, telling Alex that he has great hopes in the boy and that he needs his help. After dumping the beta unit and driving off and launching themselves into space, Centauri takes Alex to the Starfighter base where he sells him. Centauri's a human trafficker. Meanwhile, Zur, an evil alien princeling to the Rylos throne before being banished, is set to attack Rylos space with the Codon's Empire's forces. After intimidating the Starfighter base, Zur and his Codon forces cut a hole within Rylos space's force field and launch multiple asteroids towards the Starfighter base. At the same time, Alex has voiced his disapproval of being sold into the military service and is allowed to leave. While Centauri and Alex are away, the asteroids crash into the Starfighter base after an infiltrator blows up the console that is powering their self-defense grid, killing all the other Starfighters. Zur finds out that Alex is still alive and sends an assassin to finish the job. Alex survives the assassination attempt after Centauri's intervention, who is grievously wounded. Alex joins back with Centauri, with the beta unit filling in for Alex once again, and Alex races back to the now destroyed but slightly functional Starfighter base. Centauri passes away, and Grigg takes Alex to prepare for the war against Zur. Another assassin arrives at the same time on Earth to hunt Alex, aka Beta. Beta is surprised by the assassin while hanging out with Maggie at the lake, and the assassin himself was surprised to find out that Alex was in fact a beta unit, and proceeds to try to correspond his information back to Zur, which leads to Beta unit sacrificing himself to stop the flow of information. Alex, meanwhile, hasn't been discovered, and he and Grigg launch their surprise attack on Zur's Codon forces. After several runs on the enemy and destruction of their forces by the Crimson Blossom, which is what their secret weapon was called, Codon's commander has Zur taken from the bridge because, he no longer has any use and he's really tired of his voice. But this doesn't matter, as Alex and Greg successfully defeat the Codon with a power level of 9,000 and return to Rylos to tremendous applause. And the movie ends with the reveal that Centauri is in fact alive and Alex wants to be a starfighter, but he needs to do one last thing, and that's to ask Maggie to join him. Alex returns to Earth, asks Maggie, who accepts, and proceeds to fly off into space, and the movie ends. I really hope they don't break up. But now onto the review. This movie had plenty of moments that I liked, and a very few that I didn't. I don't really have a list compiled in my head about everything that I liked, but if I had to really think about it, I like the use of dialogue and camera work to show that Alex really wants to leave home. In the scene where Alex can't join his girlfriend and go down to the lake, he has a very vocal moment about not wanting to stay in their small town.
You guys think I'm gonna hang out here, watch you shine your pickup, go to the drive-in, get drunk and throw up every Saturday night, go to city college like everybody else? Forget it, man. I'm doing something with my life.
This is then followed up with him having to go help his fellow neighbors before finally returning to his home. When he enters his room, you already know how much he doesn't want to be there based on what he says, but then they add an extra layer of him wishing to be anywhere else by plastering the walls and posters of faraway beaches and cities. They then have him rest in a chair with the wind lightly blowing in his hair as he watches a model planet blow gently from the ceiling. It's not a very subtle message, but it works in showcasing how much Alex wishes to leave and how everything seems stacked up against him. And that stacking up was compounded when his mom reveals that he was denied his loan to go to school. He could still go to community college in his hometown, but it's not about, getting a higher learning or any of that. It's about getting away. Also, they needed a reason for Alex to run out of the house and meet Centauri, which does make you wonder, what Centauri would have done if Alex never got the news, and would he have just sat outside all night? But, it's a wonderful use of dialogue and camera work, which you can see in multiple movies from Star Wars to Tremors. It's the beginning of the hero's journey, as they say. And then we move over to Centauri, who honestly made this movie. He's full of charisma and attitude, especially after Alex, rejects his recruitment and he has to give back his money.
You still want to go? And miss all the excitement? Little brat.
You begin to realize that he's, a little bit of a snake oil salesman, that he's trying to sell Alex a bill of goods of excitement and adventure, when in reality he just, wanted to get paid for all the work and effort he put into creating a recruitment tool. But I think the reason why Preston worked so wonderfully for this role was because the character is based on a lot of old Hollywood characters that you don't usually see these types of characters anymore unless they're in, like the Fallout TV series or Red Dead Redemption. Now, you could say that this character still exists, usually portrayed by Middle Easterners or Southern Asians, but they're not exactly the same. Usually the Middle Eastern character just wants to sell his cheap products and make a lot of money, while a snake oil salesman promises you and offers you numerous benefits and wonders. So it's just a small difference, which Centauri is perfectly acted because of that. And what's interesting is you can see the subtleness of showing him he's a con man with his star car as well, which you'll probably end up completely ignoring. Centauri's car, when he first picks up Alex Rogan, has difficulty launching the boosters to take them into space. And then after returning to Earth with Alex, it breaks down on the side of the road, showing that Centauri really needs some cash in order to get a better vehicle. While at the same time, with his dialogue, he also spent a fortune in making the arcade game, all in order to, find recruits. It's just that little bit of writing and showcasing helps punch home that Centauri is, a shyster who maybe turns around by the end, kind of. After getting back to the base, he goes into hibernation. He does tell Griggs his final dying wish is he wants his money.
You see? Centauri brought him back. Yes, I see. Don't talk. Does he have my money, Alex?
Now, coming over to Griggs, who was a great character, but when I was younger, I liked him a lot more than I do after rewatching this. Not that his character was bad, but I remember him being funnier, and that was probably because he kept wheezing all the time when he laughed. I don't know what you could have done with the character. I know when I was watching it, I thought that I wouldn't have mind him saying some outlandish things every time Alex got a kill. So I have a little bit of a dark sense of humor. So I thought it would have been funny. It would have taken the wind out of the sails of their triumphant moment. But, a dark mind. But, hearing Griggs congratulate Alex by saying things like, "Daddy ain't returning home tonight," or "I hope you hugged your son before you left and he's not returning home to his sweetheart." Things that really ruined the moment of Alex defending the galaxy, but... And to Maggie and Alex, Maggie was fine. Alex's character was kind of, like a Luke Skywalker-ish. He was much more nervous and hesitant than Luke was. And Maggie's character was funnier because of the stories or dialogue that Beta said. The lake scene and the tongue in the ear story was funny because, Beta set it up. But I'm not knocking Maggie or Alex. She played a pivotal role in the relationship with Alex and creating that iconic scene at the end of the movie. The movie could have ended the same way as Star Wars: A New Hope, with the world celebrating Alex and his victory over the Codon. But instead, by having him return to Earth, you create this iconic moment of the ship descending and the townspeople coming out to ogle the starship as it descends. Then Alex coming down the elevator. The whole moment is, forever for me. It's seared into my brain because of how different it was to other Star Wars clones. It wasn't ice pirates with them looking upon Earth, which is reminiscent to Empire Strikes Back. It was them wishing their friends and family goodbye before flying off back into space. It was kind of like happy ever after stories. You don't know what happens next, just a world of adventure awaited them. And finally, the CGI that should be mentioned. I didn't hate the CGI in this movie. Many moments really worked and were jaw-dropping. But two moments where CGI I thought was lacking or funny. The first moment, which I understand couldn't be achieved in the window of the due date, especially even at the time with those computers, was the Starfighter's base's destruction. I like seeing the asteroids getting blown away and the starships battling it out. But what ruined the destruction of the Starfighter base was how basic it was. The base was broken into 3 parts and the middle section was destroyed. So all they did was remove the middle section. It was the only moment that made me groan a little. Because I wanted to see more that I understand they couldn't achieve. And using practical effects and matte paintings could have, but you would end up pushing the budget way over. This movie basically broke even, and if they did practical and matte paintings, you would end up losing more money on what they made at the box office. But a little fire, bits of charred remains floating in space, and of course maybe their base, the asteroid has a few more dents in it. I think would have really popped the scene, but it's a different time. And like I said, not possible. And then we come over to the funny CGI moment, showing the limits of what CGI could achieve at that time. It is, of course, the destruction of the Codon mothership. So after Alex and Griggs reunite their ship and begin blasting the Codon, which eventually leaves them unable to steer and land or really do anything with their ship, it crashes into the moon, since the ship is practically the same size. Now, that wasn't what they were going for, but it's hard to have an object that has to keep a consistent size in order to move across a computer to shrink down when getting closer to the moon. So the whole moment is funny because you can see this huge lumbering ship crash into this very small moon. If they changed the moon into an asteroid, it would have worked a lot better, but they didn't, and you get this funny scene. But one final moment before I sign up, I wanted to talk about how this movie did the appropriate thing. But you could tell they wanted to do more. And the appropriate thing was ending the movie satisfyingly. So when you go watch A New Hope, the ending to it makes you want more. But if the movie flopped, it ended it, which is what you want. The movie definitely wanted to tell more stories in the Starfighter universe and would have probably had the prince somehow escape custody and flee to like an escape pod or some ship before its destruction. While at the same time, just because the Codon Armada was defeated, the Codons were not. Their empire still is intact. Just like Darth Vader was barrel rolled into space and the Emperor, whoever he was still alive at the end of A New Hope. So you can tell that there's a lot more story to tell, but no one ever continued the story, not in comics or TV shows. And now after 40 years, studios are trying to revive The Last Starfighter too, which, sorry, I don't want it. I don't want Lewis's, granddaughter or daughter going into space to help her uncle, who has been locked in a forever war with the Kodan Empire. Do I think that story could be cool? Yes. But do I trust writers to give us a good story? No. Also, The Last Starfighter barely broke even in 1984. I don't think there is a market for a sequel. It's a cult movie, mainly with Americans, and that's only the ones who have seen it. I guess I wouldn't mind a TV show because you can explain things and you can call it The Last Starfighter, which will bring in fans old and new who, won't be confused by a sequel 40 years later. But I still don't really trust the writing staff in Hollywood today, and I think it's better just left on the shelf of movie lovers. But that's my review, and I hope you enjoyed it. I believe that this movie, for me, is a 9.5 out of 10, held back by that one scene of the Starfighter base. But all in all, a great movie. Definitely something that you should give a watch or tell others about. Make sure that you buy it on Blu-ray or whatever version so that the future generations can watch it. But you guys have a good one. Bye.